Pigwidgeon and the Pesky Poltergeist. Chapter 1. The Tiny Terror Arrives. Harry awoke on the morning of his 13th birthday feeling lonely and miserable, as he did every year at the Dursleys' house on Privet Drive. He trudged downstairs expecting the usual lackluster acknowledgement of his birthday from the Dursleys over their meagre breakfast of grapefruit halves. But when he entered the kitchen, a tiny ball of feathers came zooming wildly around his head. Harry ducked just in time, as the minuscule owl completed several dizzying loops around the room before crashing into the grapefruit bowl with a splat. "What in blazes is that ruddy thing?" bellowed Uncle Vernon, his face purpling. Aunt Petunia and Dudley cowered by the fridge as the tiny owl zoomed around the kitchen, hooting excitedly. He noticed Harry and made a beeline for him, dropping an envelope directly onto his head before landing on the counter. Hands shaking, Harry opened the letter and saw Ron's untidy scrawl. Apparently this hyperactive handful of feathers was a birthday gift named Pigwidgeon. Leave it to Ron to gift him a tiny terror of an owl, sure to enrage the Dursleys with his excessive energy. As Harry predicted, Pigwidgeon proved to be a troublesome addition to his miserable life on Privet Drive. The minuscule bird refused to stay caged, constantly escaping to zip wildly around Harry's bedroom. Hedwig looked on haughtily as Harry scrambled to catch the feathered fiend each night. Pigwidgeon insisted on hooting loudly at all hours, ruffling his feathers importantly. Harry finally silenced him with a muffling charm Hermione had taught him, collapsing in exhaustion. He wrote Ron asking him to please send more suitable birthday gifts next year. Pigwidgeon might be the tiniest male owl alive, but he had the most titanic energy Harry had ever encountered. Chapter 2. Messy Mayhem in the Library. Harry was immensely relieved when September 1st finally arrived and he headed off to Hogwarts for his third year. Surely Pigwidgeon couldn't cause too much chaos at school, with hundreds of owls flitting about delivering mail each morning. But Harry had underestimated the tiny owl's talent for mayhem. The first morning back, Pigwidgeon caused utter pandemonium in the Great Hall during breakfast. He chose to personally deliver a small note from Ron, who was sitting just a few seats down the table. Zooming wildly between floating candles and swooping low over platters of sausages and eggs, Pigwidgeon sent students diving under the tables to avoid him. He clipped Neville's head and sent his spoon flying as Neville spluttered in surprise. Even worse, he then proceeded to do several loop-de-loops around the enchanted ceiling, sending down a rain of owl's feathers onto the students below. "That's it, I'm donating that feather duster to the school as a decoy for the bludgers," roared an owl-feather-covered Draco Malfoy from the Slytherin table. Professor McGonagall finally managed to freeze Pigwidgeon with a spell so they could pry the tiny terror away from Ron and back to the owlery. Over the next few weeks, Pigwidgeon continued causing chaotic disruptions whenever he delivered letters to Ron, Harry, or Hermione. In herbology he dive-bombed protruding tentacular leaves, causing them to withdraw in alarm and spray stinky sap over everyone. Hagrid chucked the tiny owl out of care of magical creatures class after he repeatedly swooped at the hippogriffs, infuriating them. During potions he knocked over Ron's cauldron, splashing swelling solution all over himself and several Slytherins, who immediately ballooned up grotesquely. But Pigwidgeon's most memorable mayhem came during an otherwise peaceful period in the library. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were researching deadly magical creatures for Lupin's defense against the dark arts class when the usual whirlwind arrived. Pigwidgeon torpedoed through the library doors and beelined straight for Ron, a letter from Mrs. Weasley clamped in his tiny beak. He was shrieking and flapping wildly, with Peeves the Poltergeist hot on his trail, lobbing wads of chewed gum and cackling maniacally. Chapter 3. Confronting the cackling chaos. As Pigwidgeon desperately tried to evade Peeves, the Poltergeist sent books crashing off shelves and ink bottles exploding onto students. Madam Pince came running and screaming, trying to restore order, but Peeves just blew a loud raspberry at her. "Potty wee Potter's got a pesky pet," Peeves bellowed gleefully, pummeling Pigwidgeon with crumbled parchment as the tiny owl screeched in terror. Harry quickly realized Peeves had been tormenting poor Pigwidgeon for days on end. The poltergeist was merciless, probably sensing the tiny owl was an easy target for pranks and humiliation. Harry felt terrible for subjecting Pigwidgeon to this harassment and vowed to put an end to it. "That's enough, Peeves," Harry yelled angrily. "Leave Pigwidgeon alone." But Peeves just cackled and chucked Hogwarts a history straight at Harry's head. Hermione had to restrain a snarling Ron from leaping at Peeves in fury. "We have to be smart about this," she whispered. "We need a proper plan to stop his cruelty." The trio racked their brains before Harry had an idea. "Fred and George," he exclaimed. "They are always pranking Peeves back, maybe they can help us." The twins were more than happy to assist, righteously indignant at Peeves tormenting a defenseless owl. The very next morning, they all crouched hidden outside the owlery with their wands at the ready. Right on cue, Peeves came swooping in, bulging sack in hand. The poltergeist began pelting shrieking owls with dung bombs, working his way toward Pigwidgeon's perch. "Now!" yelled Harry. "Petrificus totalis!" Hermione cried, freezing Peeves mid-swoop. As the poltergeist's body went rigid, the twins leapt out. "Get him!" shouted Fred, stuffing Peeves headfirst into a burlap sack. George quickly tied it shut, muffling the poltergeist's angry yells. The twins high-fived each other, dusting off their hands. "That ought to teach that putrid pest a lesson," said George, grinning. Pigwidgeon hooted happily and nibbled Harry's finger in thanks. Harry stroked his ruffled feathers gently. "Don't worry, he won't bother you again," Harry told the loyal little owl. Pigwidgeon nuzzled against Harry's hand affectionately. Finally, the poor pestered owl could have some peace. Chapter 4. Tricksters outsmarted. News spread fast about Peeves' capture and the school celebrated his absence. But after 3 days, angry bellowing could be heard from within the sack where the twins had stashed him. Clearly, Peeves had freed himself and was on the warpath. The poltergeist stormed through the halls, upending suits of armor and overturning statues in rage. Students and teachers alike cowered out of his way, not wanting to become targets of his vengeance. Peeves was determined to get payback on Harry and his friends for tricking and trapping him. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione walked to herbology, Peeves pelted them with mushy dragon eggs from above. Later in Charms, he burst in and dropped a bucket of slugs on Ron's head. At dinner in the Great Hall, the poltergeist dumped bubotuber pus onto Hermione's plate. "Enough is enough," raged Ron, picking slugs out of his hair. "Let's just grab that foul phantom and get rid of him for good." "We need to outsmart him again," said Hermione firmly. "He expects us to attack. We need to surprise him instead." Harry thought hard. Then snapped his fingers. "I've got it!" he exclaimed. He whispered the new plan to Ron and Hermione, who grinned excitedly. The next morning, they prepared their trap, with Fred and George gathering supplies from Zonko's joke shop. The group hauled everything to an unused classroom on the 3rd floor. Then came the bait. Harry had Fred and George charm a flock of enchanted feather dusters to look like owl decoys. Meanwhile, Ron raided the kitchens for owl treats. When Peeves went swooping into the owlery again, he found it deserted except for several fake Pigwidgeons sitting on perches. Enraged, Peeves grabbed the false birds, realizing too late he'd been fooled. The door of the classroom slammed shut magically, trapping the poltergeist inside. Peeves bellowed in fury, swiping at the fake owls. Suddenly, fireworks exploded around him, courtesy of Fred and George. Harry, Ron, and Hermione high-fived, congratulating themselves on outwitting the wrathful Peeves once more. Chapter 5. Peace for Pigwidgeon. In the weeks after Peeves' capture in the classroom, Hogwarts underwent a transformation. With the poltergeist finally out of the way, Pigwidgeon could relax and deliver mail undisturbed. The tiny owl no longer had to fear Peeves viciously pelting or pranking him. To reward Pigwidgeon's patience throughout his torment, Harry lavished the little owl with affection and treats. He gently stroked Pigwidgeon's downy head and allowed him to playfully nibble his fingers. "Thank you for enduring everything Peeves put you through," Harry told him softly. "You're the bravest, most loyal owl I've ever had." Pigwidgeon hooted happily and fluttered up to perch on Harry's shoulder, nuzzling against his ear. Harry chuckled and fed him bits of bacon rind, which Pigwidgeon gobbled down eagerly. His enormous amber eyes shone with devotion and love for Harry. Meanwhile, Ron also bonded with the tiny owl, having gained newfound respect for him. "I'm sorry I ever complained about you, Pig," Ron told him, looking ashamed. "I should have seen how brave you were sticking it out against Peeves. Forgive me." Pigwidgeon zoomed joyfully around Ron's head in acceptance before settling down to cuddle in the crook of his arm. Ron smiled and stroked the owl's back. "You really are the perfect pet for our family," he said fondly. "Tiny but tough. I'll never underestimate you again." Pigwidgeon hooted in contentment, relieved to finally be at peace. With Peeves gone, he could really spread his wings and prove his worth as Harry's devoted miniature male owl. Chapter 6. Peeves returns. It was nearly a month before Peeves finally broke free from the rigged classroom. He shredded the last of the decoy owls in rage. The Poltergeist was hungry for revenge, but he knew better than to cross Harry and the twins again. Peeves steered clear of the owlery, not wanting another prank war with the infamous Weasley brothers. And though he continued wreaking havoc on unsuspecting students, the Poltergeist never bothered Pigwidgeon again. After being outsmarted twice, Peeves had learned his lesson about targeting Harry's pet owl. Now that Pigwidgeon could fly unhindered, he quickly became one of the most impressive male owls at Hogwarts. His small stature allowed him to dodge and weave nimbly between owls and students during busy breakfast deliveries. Pigwidgeon never failed to get letters directly to Harry, Ron, or Hermione, even if that meant zooming under tables and plopping them into their porridge. The professors took notice of Pigwidgeon's dedication and delivery skills. Though unconventional, his methods were highly effective. Both Hagrid and Professor Lupin complimented Harry on Pigwidgeon's performance and perseverance. "He's a talented little blighter, for sure. So full of energy and life." Hagrid chortled as Pigwidgeon buzzed happily around his shaggy head before diving into Harry's bag with a letter. Harry swelled with pride for his petite pal. He had never doubted Pigwidgeon's abilities, even when others complained. Now, he was rewarding Harry's faith 100-fold. Harry gave Pigwidgeon an extra treat that night, reflecting on the trials they had overcome together at Hogwarts so far. The end.